24-year-old Jackson is a troubled young woman who has many problems in her life. One day she ties a noose around her fan and doesn't hesitate to hang herself. But the fan falls from the ceiling and she lands on her feet, ruining her plans. Meanwhile, in another town, a man named Sam Gladwell comes home to his wife Deborah, who is barely interested in anything he says. Later, Deborah completely silences Sam. She stands up and says she can't concentrate on her work while he chatters in the background. Even though he's secretly hurt, Sam's only focus is on his newly opened package, which contains a pair of cowboy boots that don't fit him at all. Back in Jackson, things aren't looking great in her messy apartment. She is now stuck with a loose ceiling fan and her crippling depression. Desperate for company, she calls her mother but is immediately dismissed. For this reason, she calls her dealer Tony and casually asks him if he would like to hang out later that evening. But instead he reminds her of a chapel party to which she is invited. Nevertheless, Jackson remains persistent and asks if Tony would like to stay together before the party, but he says they have no such relationship and refuses. When Jackson realizes she has no one, she sulks on the floor and cries away her frustration. Meanwhile, everything is fine with Sam. Things aren't going well either when Deborah gets upset that he bought sandwiches for dinner. Even though Sam bought food without her asking, his consideration is nullified since sandwiches are not dinner. Although this is not the reaction he expects, Sam takes responsibility for his actions and later receives a text message from a woman named Addie Jackson who claims to be his daughter. At first Sam doesn't believe the text, but then he learns that Clarice Jackson is the mother he dated for a year in college. When the truth finally hits him, Sam agrees to meet his so-called daughter at the local park. Before he leaves, Deborah points to the cowboy shoes he's wearing and laughs about them. However, Sam is still dating. Shortly afterwards, Sam arrives at the park and finds that Jackson is already there. He immediately approaches his daughter and they hang out for a while until he backs out of the whole parenting situation. Because of this, Jackson argues that she has no intention of moving in with him. But her indecisive father says he didn't even know she existed and that it's all too sudden. When they decide to go their separate ways, an extremely disturbing and cruel event occurs before their eyes. Across the street, Sam and Jackson witness a man with a huge mouth swallowing a girl alive. As if that wasn't already a horrific scene, the man quickly approaches them, forcing Sam and Jackson to get into their separate cars and flee. Later that night, Sam feels sick thinking about the incident in the park while Jackson investigates the man. With 2 cigarettes in her mouth, she concentrates on her work but can't find anything helpful. Suddenly she hears a thud at her door, so she bravely opens it and finds no one outside. Thinking that she is already safe, Jackson tries to return to her computer when suddenly the man from the park bursts into her house and soon opens his huge mouth. He walks towards Jackson, holding a broom to defend herself, and when she fails to stab him, she has no choice but to run out of her house and go to Sam. Not long after, Jackson welcomes herself to her father when he's home and catches him preparing a midnight snack. Although Sam is confused about how she got in, Jackson gushes about what happened earlier and convinces him to leave or they'll get eaten too. However, Sam doesn't want to go with her, and it's not long before they start arguing and screaming. The commotion wakes Deborah and she catches the two together, and now she thinks Jackson is a mistress. However, Jackson simply introduces himself as Sam's daughter, surprising Deborah. Later, Sam stresses that he doesn't want to leave, so Jackson threatens him with a sharp knife. Because of this, he pathetically tries to throw a small butter knife at his daughter, which barely makes an impression. As Jackson forces her father to wear his shoes, Deborah looks out the window and sees the man with the huge mouth approaching her house. Thinking that the man is after him and Jackson, Sam is left with no choice but to leave to ensure his wife's safety. However, Deborah gives him a ridiculous hat to wear before she leaves. A few moments later, Sam sits in the passenger seat as her daughter drives to the chapel party where they will pick up Jackson's friend Lotus. Jackson explains that Lotus is a paranormal expert who happens to have lots of books that could help them figure out what the man from the park is. On the way to the party, Sam receives a call from his wife, but Jackson tells him not to answer it and to keep their location secret. However, the missed call makes Deborah anxious, so she leaves a voicemail for her husband. Later, Sam texts her their current location and she immediately sets off after them. Shortly afterwards, Sam and Jackson arrive at the chapel party, which features lots of alcohol, drugs, exhausted people and posters of Jesus and the crucifix. After swimming through these blasphemous displays, they finally find Lotus and tell him that he is needed to assess a paranormal situation. Although Jackson first introduced the young girl in the park, Lotus immediately concludes that she is a Rixella, an interdimensional parasite that feeds on humans. However, Jackson tells him that it's not about the girl, but about the man with the huge mouth. And she goes on and explains it in detail, but Lotus becomes distracted when he notices a guy trying to peep a girl at the party. Because of this, Lotus grabs the girl's cup and drinks it himself, making him high and unable to help Sam and Jackson. Not long after, Lotus confronts the guy, who later punches him in the face. But even though all the alcohol and drugs give him confidence, he bites the guy's leg, causing it to bleed. The scene quickly becomes explosively chaotic, so Sam and Jackson take Lotus from the party to his house. On the way to their exhausted companion's house, they find the little girl from the park and immediately approach her. Although the girl appears frightened and confused, Jackson interrogates her tirelessly while Sam responds more gently. During their conversation, they discover that the girl's name is Birch and that she needs help finding her parents. While Sam tells Jackson to change her intimidating tone, Chompy, a name they use to address the man with the big mouth, suddenly appears and quickly walks towards her. For this reason, they drag Birch into the car and flee immediately. Later they arrive at Lotus and Jackson immediately splits up. She leaves the group to secretly snort some drugs, which Sam catches her doing. Because of this, he takes the tiny Ziploc bag containing the drugs and pours it out, angering Jackson. Shortly afterwards they decide to enter the house, but Birch doesn't want to leave the car. So Sam carries her inside instead. Once they are in the house, Jackson tries to get Lotus to sleep and later checks one of his books to help them figure out what Chompy is. However, when she leaves the room, she finds Birch hovering over Sam, who is lying on the floor with his eyes open and his body petrified. Birch immediately flees after being caught, leaving Jackson worried. She later tries to punch him in the face, but when she hears no response, she begins to believe that Sam might be dead. However, Sam gasps loudly, leaving Jackson surprised but relieved to learn that he is alive. Later, as she explains that Birch could be a Rixella, Sam suddenly loses his balance and falls to the ground. He quickly removes his left boot and is horrified to find that his foot has shrunk to look like a baby's. As he panics and screams, Jackson desperately tries to hold back her laughter by crumpling up a piece of paper and using it to fill the gap in Sam's shoes. However, the situation is too much for Sam, so he texts Deborah to pick him up, but Jackson protests because his foot will stay like that and Chompy will come to get him anyway. Later, Jackson realizes that it's more about their relationship as father and daughter that Sam wants to withdraw from. This hurts and disappoints her, so she tries to leave the house, but immediately closes the door again when she finds Chompy outside. Limping, Sam goes outside to talk to Chompy while Jackson hides behind him. Although he explains in detail how Birch attacked him and how he ended up with a Smallfoot, the man just stares at them and doesn't say a word. Because of this, Jackson steps forward and asks Chompy if he needs her help. Suddenly he smiles, kneels down and then opens his huge mouth and points to it, indicating that he wants them to enter. Oddly enough, Jackson agrees and dives in, leaving Sam with no choice but to go after her. Inside, Sam and Jackson realize that they are in another dimension, meaning that Chompy's mouth is a portal leading there. As they look around, they suddenly hear a voice that introduces itself as Talon. Talon cannot speak in his physical form, so he takes her to another dimension where he explains how he is searching for a Rixella. In this case, it's Birch, and she wants to assimilate every human into an exact replica of herself. This would explain Sam's foot, which represents an unfinished assimilation. Talon also explains that he will swallow the assimilated victims and heal them, so the Rixella must be destroyed. However, he reminds Sam and Jackson that this should not happen to anyone else and they will be made aware of its existence or the mission will be jeopardized. They both agree and leave the dimension calmly. As Sam and Jackson enter the outside world, they laugh with joy, knowing that Chompy will take care of everything as they move on with their lives. Although he cannot speak, tears of joy stream from Chompy's eyes and he leaves shortly afterwards. Meanwhile, Deborah approaches Lotus' house and comes across something huge. For Sam and Jackson it's terrible, it's their savior Chompy, and now Deborah has just killed him. Jackson yells at Deborah and she later tells Sam to help her bring the body into the house. She doesn't know what to do next. 3 of them get in a car and Jackson takes her to Peter's Pancakes because she hasn't eaten in 12 hours. Later, she lashes out at the restaurant and spills some syrup all over the table, just to upset Deborah and Sam. The waitress sees all this, So Jackson, Sam and Deborah have no choice but to leave and look for Birch instead. In the car, Sam instructs which direction they should go because he can feel it in his foot. In fact, they find Birch along with many other versions of themselves. Later, Jackson manages to kidnap one of them and Deborah helps her put Birch in the trunk. However, a man witnesses the scene, so Jackson jumps at him and scares him away. Later and in the car, Deborah and Sam talk about their unhealthy relationship and soon come up with the idea of getting a divorce. Jackson, who is driving everyone to her house, awkwardly pretends not to listen to them. Not long after, they reach their destination, immediately bringing Birch inside and tying her up. But what they don't know is that Birch is summoning the other replicas of herself to go to Jackson's house. Soon the location is surrounded by other replicas of Birch, leading to Sam, Jackson and Deborah stopping them from breaking in. Meanwhile, Lotus calls Jackson and tells her that he found Chompy's body and that he cannot enter her house due to the other replicas of Birch. Later in the conversation, Jackson and Lotus come to the conclusion that the portal to Chompy's mouth maybe is still open, so throwing the girls in might work. Suddenly Sam realizes that he has lost track of Deborah and by the time he finds her, the replicas have already invaded the house, and one begins to assimilate over Deborah's unconscious body. Seeing this, Sam attacks the replicas and carries his wife to the bathroom, where they are temporarily safe. Meanwhile, Jackson selflessly runs outside to manually throw the girls into Chompy's mouth. However, she is also pushed in. Inside, she finds Birch, who later explains that something makes her do things she has no control over, like turning people into copies of themselves. Because of this, Jackson tells Birch to shift the burden onto her, and when the little girl refuses, Jackson hugs her and allows the Rixella to enter her body. She later tells Birch to leave as she summons the replicas of herself to enter Chompy's mouth. One by one, the assimilated people are healed and soon after, Sam enters the portal after being turned into a replica. However, he suddenly sees Jackson in agony. Seeing his daughter's situation, he goes to her and successfully pulls out Rixella. She felt relieved but also weak. At first they couldn't jump out of the portal, but then Lotus throws a rope in and they manage to get out alive. Outside, everyone is like themselves again and Birch is finally reunited with her family. Meanwhile, Deborah and Sam push for a divorce, and Jackson also apologizes for her past actions. She also admits to Sam that she needs help, so they rekindle their relationship. Finally, Jackson addresses Sam as her father.
So, that's the end of our movie. If you've come this far, make sure to give a thumbs up and subscribe my channel. See you later.